You know, if you've ever been like completely lost in a strange city, there is this weird, almost universal psychological phenomenon that happens. You ask two different people for directions, right?
Yeah, and you always get totally different answers.
Exactly. And the first person pauses, looks around, maybe checks their phone, and carefully says, well, I'm pretty sure it's 3 blocks down and then a left, but let me just verify that.
Right, they're being thorough.
Yes, very thorough. But then the second person doesn't even blink. They just point aggressively down the avenue and say, take a right, then your next right. You can't miss it.
And almost every single time, you're going to walk confidently in the exact wrong direction. Because, well, you listen to the second person.
Right. We will follow that confident pointing finger straight into a brick wall. And honestly, that is the paradox we are unpacking for you today.
It's a huge problem.
It really is. If you look at the recent literature, from cognitive psychology to legal defense insights, behavioral economics, evolutionary science, there is this terrifying, unifying theme. We have a dangerous, deeply hardwired obsession with certainty.
We really do. It's an illusion that we actively participate in. In this deep dive, we're going to look at how this illusion of certainty physically alters the way our brains process information and how it quietly hijacks courtrooms, how it infects entire corporate cultures, and why the people who sound the most sure of themselves are so often the most objectively wrong.
So let's start with the root of the problem, because, I mean, this isn't just a modern quirk of human behavior, right? According to the evolutionary biology sources we're looking at, and some great stuff from BBC Science Focus, and this really fascinating YouTube short, human beings instinctively trust delivery over accuracy.
Yeah, complete.
If someone speaks slowly, clearly, and loudly, we just tend to believe them. The actual factual content seems to be completely secondary. Why are our brains built that way?
Well, basically because for the vast majority of human history, questioning a confident leader was a great way to get yourself killed.
Wow, okay. Straight to the point.
It's true. What's crucial to understand here is that this isn't like a glitch in our hardware. It is a primal survival mechanism. Think back to our tribal hunter-gatherer days. If you're foraging in the brush and someone in your group suddenly yells, "Predator," with absolute, unwavering confidence, that is not the time for a peer review.
Right. You don't stop and say, let's examine your methodology for identifying that tiger. You just run.
Precisely. We are highly social, hierarchical creatures. We are hardwired to follow confident leaders because, in the wild, rapid adherence to a decisive voice kept the group alive.
That makes sense. Consensus takes time.
Exactly. Consensus takes time, and time is a luxury you don't have when you're being hunted. So in modern psychology, this mechanism is called a heuristic, which is essentially just a cognitive shortcut. Specifically, it relies on a process called attribute substitution.
Wait, attribute substitution. I want to make sure we really understand that mechanism. How does the brain actually substitute an attribute?
It happens when our brains are faced with a computationally difficult or complex question. The brain is an incredibly energy-intensive organ, so it's always looking to save calories.
Lazy.
Essentially, yes. So instead of doing the heavy cognitive lifting to answer a hard question, your brain unconsciously substitutes it with a much easier related question. And it does this without you even realizing it.
Give me an example of that.
Well, the hard question might be, is this information factually correct, properly researched, and logically sound? That takes work to figure out. So the easy question it substitutes is, does this person sound sure of themselves?
Oh, wow. Okay, so using the confidence heuristic is basically like, it's like judging the quality of a restaurant entirely by how bright its neon sign is outside?
Yes, that is a brilliant way to look at it.
Because it's a super easy visual signal for our brains to process from a distance, but logically, the wattage of a light bulb tells you absolutely nothing about the skill of the chef in the kitchen.
Exactly. You're substituting the brightness of the sign for the taste of the meal. It's a total energy-saving shortcut.
But I mean, if that neon sign is just where we decide to eat on a Tuesday night, fine, the stakes are pretty low. What happens when we rely on that exact same faulty brain circuitry in situations that actually determine people's freedom?
Yeah, that's where the results are often catastrophic. And nowhere is this more apparent than in the modern courtroom. The legal literature we're examining, specifically the Kill Law article, highlights a well-documented phenomenon known as the CSI effect.
Oh, right, the CSI effect.
Yeah.
This is the idea that modern jurors walk into a courtroom with completely unrealistic expectations because they've watched like hundreds of hours of forensic crime drama.
Exactly. They expect high-tech, undeniable DNA evidence wrapped up with a neat little bow in 45 minutes.
Which obviously doesn't happen in real life.
No. Real forensic science doesn't work like television at all. It's slow, it takes months, and the results are often messy, degraded, or purely circumstantial. So put yourself in the mind of juror. You are faced with the incredibly heavy, computationally difficult task of determining a human being's guilt based on ambiguous data.
Your brain gets fatigued.
Exactly. It starts looking for a shortcut. It looks for the brightest neon sign in the room.
And usually that's an eyewitness pointing a finger from the stand.
Yes. And this is where the mismatch between human confidence and factual accuracy becomes absolutely terrifying. Decades of psychological research show that an eyewitness's confidence has virtually zero correlation with their actual accuracy.
Wait, really? Zero correlation?
Practically zero. Human memory isn't a video recording.
Wow.
It is highly susceptible to distortion, decay, and implicit bias every single time it's recalled.
So I could sit on a witness stand, be 100% genuinely confident that I saw a specific person at a specific time, and be 100% objectively wrong.
You absolutely could be. Yet, when mock juries are studied, confident witnesses consistently and overwhelmingly sway the verdicts, even when hard forensic evidence contradicts them.
That is wild. The confident delivery completely overrides the factual data in the minds of the jurors.
It does. It's that powerful.
Okay, I can understand how a jury box can be swayed by emotion and a pointing finger. Courtrooms are inherently dramatic, but surely this bias falls apart when we're dealing with hard, cold numbers, right? Like in the financial world, you can't fake a spreadsheet.
Well, you would think so, but the data shows the exact opposite. In fact, one of the foundational studies in behavioral economics by Price and Stone proves that we might be even more vulnerable to false confidence when our own money is on the line.
Let's dig into that study because the premise of it genuinely sounds like a prank.
It really does sound made up.
Yeah.
So they set up an experiment where participants had to choose between two fictional financial advisors to manage their money. The participants were shown a series of stock predictions from each advisor. Now, one advisor was moderate and well-calibrated. That means their stated level of confidence actually matched reality. If they told the client they were 70% sure a stock would rise, they were historically right about 70% of the time.
Which is exactly what you want. I mean, you want an advisor who knows the limits of their own knowledge.
Right, logically.
Mhm.
But the other advisor, the extreme advisor, was highly overconfident. They systematically inflated their predictions, making them about 15% more extreme than reality warranted.
So if they were only mildly confident, they claimed absolute ironclad certainty.
Exactly.
But here is the part of the experimental design I need you to clarify. The participants didn't just hear the sales pitch, right? They were shown the actual historical outcomes of the stocks.
Yes, that is the most crucial part of the study. The participants saw, sequentially, the prediction and the result. So it would say, this extreme advisor claimed to be 90% sure the stock would go up, but the stock went down.
Okay, so they received cold, hard outcome feedback, proving that the extreme advisor was bluffing and frequently wrong.
Exactly. The data was right there.
Wait, so with the actual data sitting right in front of their eyes, proving the moderate guy was honest and the extreme guy was overconfident, who did they choose?
A staggering 71% to 78% of people still chose to hire the extreme, overconfident advisor.
How is that even possible? How does a human brain justify handing its life savings to a proven bluffer? Are they just mathematically illiterate?
It's not really about math. It's about cognitive dissonance. When faced with the glaring discrepancy between the advisor's extreme confidence and their poor performance, the participants' brains had to resolve the conflict somehow.
Okay, so how did they justify it?
Well, the researchers dug into the psychological profiles of the participants to understand how they did this, and they found two very distinct ways people process that dissonance.
Break those down for us.
First, they looked at people who score high in a trait called need for cognition. This simply means individuals who naturally enjoy effortful analytical thinking.
And you overthinkers.
Basically, yeah. And these people did exactly what you'd expect. They accurately noticed the gap in confidence, they processed the hard data, and they realized the extreme advisor was bluffing.
So the analytical thinkers spotted the neon sign for what it was. But what about the massive majority who chose the extreme advisor? What was going on in their heads?
They tended to score much higher on a clinical psychological metric known as right-wing authoritarianism. And just to be completely clear for you listening, in the context of clinical psychology, this term has absolutely nothing to do with modern political parties.
Yeah.
We are not taking any political sides here.
Right. It's just a clinical term.
Exactly. It's simply a behavioral metric that measures a person's strict deference to authority and their preference for clear-cut rules and certainty.
So they are deeply, deeply uncomfortable with ambiguity.
Yes. For individuals scoring high on this metric, the ambiguity of the moderate advisor, the guy saying, well, I'm only 70% sure, was deeply unsettling to them.
Huh.
So to resolve their cognitive dissonance, they didn't just ignore the extreme advisor's overconfidence. They actively translated that extreme confidence directly into perceived correctness.
Wow. They essentially rationalized it by thinking, well, if he is this absolutely certain, he must know something the data isn't showing. He must be a secret genius.
Precisely. That is deeply unsettling, isn't it?
It really is. If the world, from the jury box to Wall Street, is essentially paying out massive dividends for unearned confidence, it makes me wonder if these people are just incredibly skilled con artists. Like, they know they're bluffing, but they also know society will reward them for it.
And that brings us to the most tragic part of this whole phenomena. In many cases, they aren't faking it at all. They truly deeply believe their own hype.
Because of the Dunning-Kruger effect?
Yes. The famous 1999 study by David Dunning and Justin Kruger. We got some great insights on this from the Didask source.
Oh, yeah. Break that study down for us.
So they tested college students on things like grammar, logic, and humor. The statistical takeaway from that study is legendary. The students who performed in the bottom 12th percentile, meaning almost 90% of the room was smarter than them on these tasks, genuinely believed they were performing in the 62nd percentile.
That is insane. You know, I always thought the Dunning-Kruger effect was just like an ego defense mechanism. Like,
No.
nobody wants to admit they're at the bottom of the barrel, so they puff out their chest. Are you saying it's an actual structural glitch in how the brain perceives itself?
It is entirely structural. Dunning and Kruger mapped out what they call an ignorance curve. When you are a complete beginner at a complex task, your brain actually lacks the cognitive architecture required to recognize its own incompetence.
You literally don't know enough to know what you don't know.
Exactly.
But how does that physically manifest in the brain? If I don't know something, shouldn't my brain just register a blank space? Why does it actively invent a feeling of expertise?
It comes down to which neural circuits your brain is relying on. Neurological studies using EEGs have actually tracked the brain activity of novices versus true experts.
What did they find?
They found that poor performers heavily rely on a neural circuit called the FN400. This component of the brain registers a very shallow, vague sense of familiarity.
Okay.
True experts, on the other hand, utilize late parietal components of the brain, which are associated with detailed, accurate recollection and heavy critical analysis.
Let me see if I have this right. It's like if I skim a Wikipedia article on quantum physics. I see buzzwords like quarks and entanglement. Later, someone brings up quantum physics at a dinner party.
Oh, we've seen this happen.
Right, and my FN400 circuit lights up because those words are vaguely familiar, and my brain mistakes that shallow familiarity for actual mastery. I'm not lying to the room. My brain is literally tricking me into feeling like Einstein.
That is exactly what is happening. Your brain is generating a powerful feeling of unfounded certainty based purely on shallow familiarity. And what's really fascinating, and the BBC source brought this up, is how our environment can either correct this glitch or make it permanent.
Really? Like how?
Well, sociological research points out that a highly privileged, pampered upbringing can actually supercharge this neurological illusion.
Why? Just because they're surrounded by yes men telling them how great they are?
That's part of it, sure.
Yeah.
But it's mainly about a lack of friction. If an individual grows up affluent and constantly shielded from the consequences of their actions, they never face the hard, undeniable reality of being wrong.
Ah, I see.
Their brain is never forced to undergo the painful cognitive process of correcting its own errors. As a result, that FN400 circuit never really gets challenged. They develop an unbreakable, entirely unearned confidence because they've simply never hit a wall hard enough to learn they aren't invincible.
That makes an incredible amount of sense. So, if we all have this faulty FN400 circuit waiting to trick us, how do we break the illusion? How do we force the brain to recognize its own incompetence?
The training methodologies from Didask recommend injecting constant low-stakes friction into learning.
Like what kind of friction?
Continuous testing, immediate targeted feedback, and putting people in highly realistic scenarios. You have to force the brain to confront the brutal gap between its vague sense of familiarity and its actual measurable ability to perform a task.
Okay, so we have individual brains biologically hardwired to trick themselves into false confidence, and we have a society that actively rewards that false confidence with money and power. What happens when you take hundreds of these naturally overconfident, highly rewarded people and put them in a single corporate structure?
Yeah, that's where it stops being an individual cognitive glitch and it becomes a systemic disease. It becomes highly contagious.
Which brings us to the Enron scandal. Everyone knows Enron as the massive accounting fraud that wiped out billions of dollars in 2001. But the organizational behavior research we're looking at, from the Harvard Business Review on Scribd, points out that Enron wasn't destroyed by a spreadsheet error. It was destroyed by a culture of arrogance.
Yes, the fraud was just a symptom. The culture was the actual disease. And to understand how quickly that kind of toxic culture can spread, we have to look at the contagion experiments.
Tell me about those.
Researchers designed laboratory studies to test if overconfidence could literally be transmitted from one person to another. They took complete strangers and paired them up. And they found that if you pair a cautious, highly realistic person with an overconfident partner for just 15 minutes,
15 minutes, that's it.
that's it. In just 15 minutes, the cautious person functionally catches the overconfident.
Boy, am I just consciously mimicking the person next to me so things aren't awkward? Because honestly, if I'm sitting next to a guy who is bragging and acting invincible, my natural instinct is usually to roll my eyes and do the exact opposite.
Well, that's what you think you'd do, but the transmission is entirely subconscious. When interviewed after the experiment, the cautious participants insisted that the overconfident partner had absolutely zero sway over their own self-assessment. They had no idea their brains were recalibrating.
How does that subconscious recalibration actually work?
It's called social norm recalibration. Human brains are constantly scanning our immediate social circle to establish a baseline for acceptable behavior. When you are exposed to someone acting wildly overconfident, your brain quietly shifts your internal baseline to match theirs.
Just assuming this is the new standard required to survive in this specific group.
Exactly.
And does this contagion only stick to the specific task you're working on? Like, if we're both analyzing financial risk together, I suddenly become riskier with finances.
No, and this is where it gets truly dangerous. The hubris detaches from the specific task and infects your entire mindset.
What do you mean?
Well, in one of the experiments, they had participants watch a peer act wildly overconfident at a completely arbitrary task, guessing the weight of strangers in a photograph.
Okay, weird task, but sure.
Right. But days later, those same participants were brought back to play a game of Bogle, the visual word search game.
Right. But guessing someone's weight and finding words in a Boggle grid rely on entirely different skill sets. There's literally zero overlap.
Exactly. But the participants who had observed the overconfident weight guesser were measurably, statistically more overconfident in their own Boggle abilities days later compared to the control group.
That is wild.
The arrogance was airborne, essentially, and it applied itself to everything they did.
So one overconfident executive can literally infect an entire department's ability to accurately assess reality.
Yes, but there is one major caveat to the contagion effect. It only works if your brain perceives the overconfident person as part of your in-group.
Oh.
The researchers did a variation of the study where the overconfident peer was introduced as a student from the exact same university as the participant. In that scenario, the overconfidence spread like wildfire.
But what if they weren't?
When the overconfident peer was introduced as a student from a rival university and out-group, the contagion completely stopped.
That is fascinating. We only catch the arrogance virus if it comes from someone we identify with, someone we see as one of us.
Precisely. This is why corporate cultures like Enron cascade so disastrously. If the CEO or your direct manager is exhibiting this wild hubris, it filters down through the entire organizational chart because they are the ultimate in-group leader.
Wow. Everyone's brain subconsciously recalibrates to match the boss.
It creates a self-reinforcing echo chamber that rewards bravado over competence. And eventually, the whole structure collapses under the weight of its own reality distortion.
Okay, let's pull all of these threads together for you because we have covered a massive amount of ground in this deep dive. We've learned that our preference for confidence isn't just a personality quirk. It is a primal evolutionary shortcut designed to keep us alive in the wild.
But in the modern world, it's a hazard.
It totally is. It corrupts our courtrooms when we overvalue the certainty of eyewitnesses. It drains our bank accounts when we choose bluffing financial advisors to resolve our cognitive dissonance.
It's a literal structural glitch in the FN400 circuit of our brains that tricks us into feeling mastery from mere familiarity.
Yes. And finally, it is a highly infectious psychological contagion that can rewrite a corporate culture in just 15 minutes.
So for everyone listening, the next time someone sits across from you and pitches an idea with absolute, unwavering certainty, I want you to remember the extreme financial advisor. Remember the jurors falling for the CSI effect.
Take a step back.
Exactly. Take a step back, override your evolutionary programming, and ask yourself, am I actually trusting the data here, or am I just being seduced by the delivery?
That is such a crucial question. And I want to leave you with one final lingering thought to mull over on your own. If our brains are biologically hardwired to mistake confidence for competence,
We know they are.
right, and if we live in an increasingly complex, interconnected society where algorithms are literally designed to reward the loudest, most unconditionally certain voices with the most followers, are we slowly breeding a global leadership class that is optimized only for the appearance of certainty rather than the capacity for truth?
That is a terrifying thought.
It's something to think about the next time you're scrolling. Don't let the neon signs blind you. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.